Thank you, Alex, once again for your contribution there. The Reverend Eric Walker Wickstrom wrote a book entitled Serving with Grace. It's only about 80 pages long, and I think it actually sits on the bookshelves of most UU ministers. And when I wrote that, I recognized that that's kind of a paradoxical way for me to introduce it, because the subtitle of the book is Lay Leadership as a Spiritual Practice. I'm going to talk today about some of our recent experience as laity leading this fellowship. I want to share how Reverend Wickstrom and I see this effort as spiritual practice, and I hope there will be some sense in that made clear for you as well. I'll start with an excerpt from Serving with Grace, where Reverend Wickstrom wrote, "Common wisdom holds that people come to church for a sense of belonging, and that getting involved in a committee or task force is a great way to meet people and feel more connected. You do meet people while serving on a committee, and yes, working together in common purpose can create these bonds. But perhaps this is not really why people come to church. Though this is often why they say they come to church, I think there is a deeper reason, and that is to have their lives transformed. If so, then no amount of encouragement will get them to sign up for one more thing in their already busy lives. Just getting involved is not enough. It doesn't speak to their deepest need, a transformed life. Imagine if the practical and administrative work of the church, meetings, planning, teaching, etc., was understood not as a necessary evil, but as an integral part of the mission of the church to spiritually nurture us. What if lay leadership were not a means to an end, but an end itself? Could you experience the meeting room as a zendo and the deliberations of a task force as a form of group prayer? Imagine church not as a place led by a few overly taxed people, but one where leadership is a broadly shared ministry that members of the community undertake for the deep joy of it. I agree with the thoughts of Reverend Wickstrom, and in my experience of religious community, my access to the transformative has come through exquisitely mundane moments. Some of you will remember painting my house as I lay all tubed up in the hospital a couple years ago. Granted, open heart surgery isn't mundane, but people coming together with rollers and trays is. And that coming together around the everyday work helped transform my sense of vulnerability, an essential element of my spiritual life. And I'm pretty sure this is a shared experience. I bet each of you can think of your own exquisitely mundane moments that became transformative. I also recognize that after a recent 2.5-hour board meeting, the members of our board of trustees were probably just joyful that it was over. But even in that moment of tiredness, there was a sense of the joy that the work had gotten done and we were moving forward together. So for the past 7 months, I have enjoyed my perch as a kind of hybrid lay leader and someone who has done some reading like Reverend Wickstrom's book. And I believe that throughout those months, we have transformed many of our Zoom meetings into an integral part of the mission of this church to spiritually nurture us. For today's telling, my recollections are going to start those 7 months ago with an October 8th digest article that read, and I'm going to read it right to you now. Headline: Ministerial Transition Task Force goes to work. At their September meeting, the KUUF board established the Ministerial Transition Task Force, MTTF. The group will regularly report processes and progress and welcomes questions. To begin, the group will search for part-time ministerial services without going through the official UUA search process. The MTTF is gratefully aware of the current lay minister's fortuitous arrival in Houghton and acknowledges we may need to use some creativity to find our next right minister. The group also recognizes that a small working group can be nimble, but risks missing voices and perspectives of the wider congregation. If you want to help in this challenging work by serving on the MTTF, please contact Paul or Ellen. The MTTF will come to the congregation with questions about what is most important to us in a minister's role for our vibrant fellowship and future selves. And it closes with, between COVID-19 and a fraught election, the future can feel frightening. The strength of our relationships is critical as we care for each other now and imagine a world guided by equity, justice, and compassion. We welcome the congregations and the conversations and considerations ahead as we work together to bring the right ministerial care and service to KUUF. I'm pretty sure that Reverend Wickstrom would love that article. Kicking off the next 7 months of work, alerting us that we were going to have to be nimble and creative, that kind of, for me, the guiding principles of leadership during the frighteningly uncertain time of the pandemic and the upcoming election, and at the same time, declaring a commitment to reach out to hear the voices and perspectives of the wider congregation, relying on the essence of our faith, that we are more human through our relationships with others. And the next step in this 7-month process was exactly that, extending our relationships over Zoom. The November 25th digest had this entry. The Ministerial Transition Task Force invites you to join us for an online conversation about the following questions. What do you like best about our congregation? What do you see as 3 key functions of our congregation? And what do you see as the 3 most important functions of our minister? These questions address the core beliefs and aspirations of our fellowship, and your answers will inform our next steps. We'll meet on Zoom in small groups of about 6 people to share our thoughts on these questions. You can choose the day and time that works best for you. Task force members and other congregational leaders will serve as facilitators for each group, and the results will be shared in a congregational meeting in January. And this message closed with, we particularly want to urge our snowbirds and other members living far away to participate in these online discussions. KUUF's reach extends far beyond the Keweenaw, and everyone's opinion matters. Well, your answers will inform our next steps. Reverend Wickstrom's call for us to imagine church not as a place led by a few overly taxed people, but one where leadership is a broadly shared ministry that members of the community undertake for the deep joy of it. This outreach called for leadership to be broadly shared. 18 members joined the 3 small group conversations, offered their responses to the questions. Those responses were gathered, reviewed by the MTTF, and bundled for a Sunday service presentation in collaboration with our Mid-America region congregational consultant, the Reverend Phil Lund, on that January 17th Sunday. We landed the work of the MTTF front and center at a Sunday service. The administrative work of the church, these meetings, those deliberations, the planning, was understood not as a necessary evil, but as an integral part of the mission of the church to spiritually nurture us. And we shared it on a Sunday. The next step was predicted in that October post that I read to you. Remember the digest entry that said the group will search for a part-time ministerial services without going through the official UUA search process. The MTTF acknowledged at that time that we may need to use some creativity to find our right next minister. Well, shortly after Reverend Lund's service in January, the board developed a refinement to our ministerial transition process. It recognized two parallel efforts that had to proceed simultaneously. One was to prepare us for our search for a long-term minister, and the other was to fill the gap between June 1st and September 2022. That September date is the earliest we could engage a new minister through the UUA search process. So the Fill the Gap task force was formed, and they began a local search for the right people to provide the ministerial services we felt were essential for maintaining the vibrancy of this congregation over the next 15 months. After 2 months of outreach conversations with multiple possible candidates, about 3 weeks ago, we entered into negotiations with two wonderful candidates, one as a consistent Sunday service leader and the other to help maintain our ongoing lay ministry pastoral care. And Ellen read this. You can see how Ellen and I didn't plan this, so I'm not going to read to you that whole post from this last Thursday, but Pastor Sarah Semler-Smith and Heidi Bresnahan have been hired by the board to fill that gap for those 15 months. And what I really want to highlight there is that filling the gap was the hiring was the end of the filling the gap and 7 months of great good work. The conversations we had during that time were sometimes frustrating, but always worked as a broadly shared ministry that members of the community undertook for the deep joy of it. As I look back to those conversations, they were truly sacred conversations. And as Ellen foretold in her announcements today, we have a chance for many more conversations. The parallel effort of finding long-term ministerial option starts with forming that search committee. And again, the title from the last Thursday's digest of the Post was even headlined as Search Committee Conversation. We're going to move through this next couple of weeks, making calls, talking to one another, talking to everybody in the congregation if we can. And I want to say here, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I don't think we know for sure how the search is going to work out. But we know that we must make ourselves available to all the options when seeking long-term ministerial services. The establishment of a search committee will ensure we keep our options open. So I'm hoping that each of you, as Ellen said, will recognize an unrecognized phone number and pick it up and share your thoughts when you're called in these next few weeks. I know much of what I did today was to read digest posts. I did it partly to highlight that during this pandemic, the digest has become an essential communication channel for this fellowship. I also read them as a way of substantiating what I think is a dazzling example of turning the meeting room into a sacred gathering space. Now that's a meeting room on Zoom even into a sacred gathering space, of making the deliberations of task force after task force seem like prayers. The outcome of all those moments is a continuity of caring, compassionate, and considerate ministerial presence as we further explore and search for a regular, longer-term ministerial option. I sing the praises of all who have shared in the work of these past 7 months, and I encourage everyone to maintain their loving involvement in the months to come.